And I know that this may sound, as maybe superficial to, pure anthropologists, and I'm actually, I'm actually very open to suggestions to broaden the scope of this theoretical framework. But anyway, there is a literature speaking about this infrastructure of post-human relations, and I use that in my work, and I call that a weird assemblage. Another way of understanding why this assemblage is weird is what I said before. In the context of post-socialist and civilizing Romania, it's unacceptable to have that kind of life. The possibility of that life is unacceptable. It's not only that the life itself is unacceptable, the possibility that people in Romania, a country that accesses the European Union, it's impossible to think that they can still live underground. But I think that in order to challenge this civilizing discourse, we need, again, to reappropriate this notion of weirdness. Okay? So my aim in this work is to trace and unfold how people have assembled their being together to affirm a cultural politics of home at the margins. I am saying, just to translate this, that the canal was home. And actually, it's not me that I'm saying this. They were calling that place home. Andra, in the first quote that I have in my paper, she's saying, now that I lost my home, I did the interview after the election in that case. Now that I lost my home, acum că am pierdut casa. Casa is home in Romania. What do I do? Ce fac? Okay. What is home? Basic definition here, for me, is that economy of co-working, sharing, living in the underground. It's an economy. It's a process of doing things together. Okay? And that process sometimes it's empowering, sometimes disempowering, sometimes brings joy, sometimes brings sadness. I'm not interested in defining the outcome of the being together. It's not interesting for me. For me, it's interesting to look at how those things come into the world. Now, home in the underground, and here now I enter into the ethnographic details, was made of two processes, okay? And we need to look at both in order to understand why there is such a possibility of life underground. The first one is because of history, okay? And I will spend 10 minutes. I know maybe it's a bit redundant, but it's important to deal with history, because otherwise we don't understand why people ended up living in the canal. And we just reproduce the same kind of understanding that Al Jazeera did in their documentary, They choose to live underground. Well, it depends how you define choice. And the second point is about the everyday assemblage of life. So let's move into the history. There are 3 points. I will try to be brief here, but they are important. 3 points that are important to understand the context of Bucharest and the context of the canals. The first one is related to the regime. The second one, the communist regime, of course. The second one is related to a particular policy that that regime enacted, which is a natalist policy. And the third point is related to drugs. So let's start with the regime. As you know, in Romania, we had the Ceausescu's family ruling from the 60s up to 89. Now, the very interesting bit about the Ceausescu's case, which is different, very different from any other Eastern European country, is that they had a privileged relationship with the West. Okay? And the reason why they had a privileged relationship with the West is because when Ceausescu got into power, he didn't have much credibility with his own people. So in order to get that credibility, he started to detach himself from the motherland, from the Union of the Socialist Republic. So he did that through various policies, and he also started to gain debts with Western countries and Western banks and Western financial institutions. So essentially, of course, as soon as you start to get the money from Western people become your best friends. And here you can see a depiction of Ceausescu's with Queen Elizabeth II. It's amazing how many prizes and recognition Ceausescu's got during these years. very interesting, I was just looking it up the other day, for the Senate of the Italian Republic, the wife of Ceausescu is still today a Cavaliere della Repubblica, okay? Which is very important honorificeness nowadays. Still today she is. It's not that we removed the honorificeness. Anyway, in this context, why I'm referring to this context is because we need to remember three things. First off, during these years, free movement was not possible, frontiers were closed, and housing was granted. So we can enter into the details of what the Socialist Republic of Romania was. We can attack socialism in all sorts of ways. We can attack Ceausescu in all sorts of ways, but technically there was no homelessness. Okay? I'm not defending Ceausescu here, I'm just pointing to a fact. Housing was provided. So the consequences of this is that after '89, authorities did not have any experience whatsoever in dealing with homelessness. A lot of the discourse is about, look at these Eastern European countries, they're all corrupted, they don't care about poor people. Yes, it's true nowadays, but remember that they generally didn't have any experience. They didn't have any service in place to care for certain populations. Okay? So this is important to highlight. Right? It's an historical fact. And the second point is also that drugs were virtually non-existent. Of course, Valerius, Ceausescu's son, was famous for his cocaine parties and whatnot, but drugs were just for the elites. There was no heroin in the 80s in Romania. There was no, or very little. Anyway, it was not something that people were using. Right? In Western Europe, it was very popular. So first point, there was little experience in dealing with sudden homelessness and drug use in the aftermath of the transition. Second point, which connects to the fact that Ceausescu had a very good relationship with the West. Two interrelated facts. The first one is that the Romanian socialist experience was a nationalistic one. Okay? It was based on the fact that Romania is a great country and wants to become a great country through socialism. And one way of becoming a great country, as fascism teaches us, is to have many people. Because you need to be powerful, so you need to have a mass, a critical mass. Romania is a fairly small country, although it's one of the biggest in Eastern Europe. But during those years, they decided that they wanted to have a proactive natalist policy. Here you can see a depiction of the time with Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu's surrounded by young kids moving towards the future. Okay, here it's a little bit of discourse analysis related to images, but Romania was bombarded with the population of Romania was bombarded with this kind of discourse during the 70s and 80s. So Ceausescu dreamed of a great Romania, and to increase birth rate with a specific law, the party abolished abortion. I'm sorry you can't read it here because it's cut, but essentially the party abolished abortion. What really happened, and there is a couple of beautiful Romanian films depicting this story that you may have seen, what happened is that essentially the birth rate increased, but not too much, okay? Because, they formally abolished abortion, but then, of course, women were practicing abortion anyway, and actually what happened is that the birth rate didn't increase a lot, but the death rate increased quite a bit. And so it was a dramatic policy. But anyway, it increased a bit. Another thing that really increased a lot during those times was HIV, okay? And the reason why HIV increased so much is because it's an interrelation of complex facts, but one of the reasons, for instance, that people told me when I was doing my field work also with doctors and in hospitals, essentially, that people didn't have enough money, so one of the way of getting a little money was to sell blood. The fact is that they were going to hospital and selling blood, but they didn't have enough infrastructure actually to support blood collection and whatnot. So essentially, they used the same syringe for many people. It's like they were not they just made a lot of mistakes, practical mistakes. This is at the beginning of the 80s. But the political mistake was to deny those mistakes. The official policy of the Communist Party of Romania was that in a socialist country, HIV is impossible. So this is an official document. So it says that it's impossible to have HIV in a socialist country, so we don't have any HIV. Of course, they had a lot of HIV, and still today, Romania is the country in Europe with the highest rate of HIV-positive people. Okay? Now, this is the first bit. The second bit is that this natalist policy and HIV and the growth in the HIV rate intertwined with the economic collapse of the economic policy that Ceausescu brought to the fore since the mid-60s. That economic policy, as I said before, was very much reliant upon an heavily indebtedness with Western countries, and especially with the International Monetary Fund. This is a story that repeats itself in many other countries also today. Now, he made a deal, an economic deal that didn't play out, okay, and then he couldn't build the factories that he wanted to build, and he couldn't, generate the income by which he was thinking of repaying the debt. So essentially, he didn't have the money, they didn't have the money to repay the debt that they made with the International Monetary Fund. This is a very interesting case of austerity here, austerity politics, because what Ceausescu did back in the days was not to say, okay, I'm not repaying the debt anymore, I'm continuing towards my socialist path, I don't care about the debt. No, what he decided to do was to repay the debt in its entirety. So in order to repay the debt in its entirety, all the production and everything was just, moved towards export. And so here you have, these big lines of people in the 80s just waiting to buy a loaf of bread, cuts in electricity, cuts in hot water, and so on and so forth. Okay? He actually managed to pay the debts. In about 87, 89, Romania was debt-free. And this is why everybody welcomed Romania after 89 in terms of, investing and buying all sorts of things. I mean, it was a great investment in 89 Romania. It was a terrible thing in 87 for people living there. So these two things intertwined together, and what happens is that during the 80s, the number of institutionalized kids raised considerably, okay? Reaching almost 160,000 children in 89 in states of orphanotrophy. Why it's like that? Because on the one hand, you push, families to have kids. On the other hand, these families cannot provide for them, so they, sometimes they decide to have children anyway because the state was giving subsidies, but then they place children into state orphanotrophies. In this state orphanotrophies, the health care is terrible, and then you have this growing rate of HIV. So you have in 89, 90, 91, this huge population of children living in orphanotrophies. Most of them are affected by serious illnesses, including HIV. And in 90, 91, 92, austerity politics starts to kick in. So public cuts, and the first thing that cuts during those days are essentially this service provision. Lots of orphanotrophies are closed. Many children decide to escape orphanotrophies because in the end, if you are 14 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, living in an orphanotrophy in 89, everything is collapsing. There is also a sense of momentum. History is being made. You want to be part of that. So what do? You just get out of there. You just walk away from the orphanotrophy. What happens, of course, is that you walk away from there, but you have nowhere else to go. So in those years, you have the establishment of the phenomenon of the street kids in many Romanian cities, like Cluj, like Bucharest, Timișoara, and so on and so forth. So you see the history here. There is a reason why suddenly, if you went to Romania up to 2010 actually, you saw so many teenagers, so many young adults living on the street. There are historical reasons for this. Okay? It's not that they choose to live underground. It's not that they choose to live on the street. Okay? And this needs to be aligned, needs to be stated. Last point, which has a deep historical importance, and the reason why I rely so much on history is because I think that meaningful ethnography is based on deep understanding of the context that you are studying. And sometimes we lose a little bit of that. The third point is related to drugs, because the community that I studied was mostly made of people consuming drugs. As I was saying, during the communist times, there were virtually no drugs in the country. Okay? But that, of course, changed after '89 because the frontiers were open. Okay? So movement was possible again. And that happened not only in Romania, but it happened all over Eastern Europe, all over the Balkans. So a new route was technically possible for drugs coming mainly from Afghanistan. Okay? And this is the so-called Balkan route. Okay? It's the Balkan route of opioids. Now, if you want to move drugs in a country, it has been shown in the case of the US and Mexico, you need to create a market in that country. It's not that you just can, move drugs and you bring drugs wherever you want to go. First, because it's a waste, I mean, you have all these people, don't you want them to enjoy your product? And second, because you can create the connections. Yes, only 15. Okay, great, I need to move. You can create the connections that allow you to sell things. So anyway, these drugs passed into Romania. The market was created because drugs were given for free. I'm just going very fast. Drugs were given for free to people in order to get them hooked, okay? And this happens, is a usual case. But of course, the first people that were given drugs, who are? The employees in the banks or the people living on the street? You make 1 + 1. So this is the history. Now, let's enter into it, okay? The canal, let's enter into it, into the canal. I don't know if you remember the picture that I showed you before, that little drawing that I made at the bottom of the map. But the canal was made of a series of chambers, okay? So you enter into this manhole here, you go down, and actually you go down this way because it's impossible otherwise. Here there is a ladder. And when you are inside, on your right there is a little chamber, and then the actual canal starts on your left. So there are 3 big rooms. The first 2 are populated by people, so people are living there. And the infrastructure is made of 2 pipes which have been covered with concrete by Bruce Lee and the Boschettari, the hustlers of the class, because otherwise it's too hot to be there. On top of the pipes you have mattresses, you have all sorts of things, and the average height of the canal is more or less my height, okay? And sometimes it's even lower. And the space is very tiny, so it's about the space of my body. And you walk into it, at the end of the second chamber, you have Bruce Lee office. Essentially, they closed the entrance to the next chamber, and there, Bruce Lee sat all day, dealing with drugs, speaking to people, giving money, cooking food. I'll show you pictures about that. Now, what is the everyday economy of the canal? What is the infrastructure? What is the home here? This is Bruce Lee in his office, okay? They had television, they had different utilities, and so on and so forth. Now, I want to give voice to this man because he was defined as the king of the sewers, okay, Regele Canalilor. But actually the way in which people refer to him was Tata, father, okay? Father because he was one of the first that started to deal with that specific canal and make life possible there, okay, by covering the pipes and whatnot. I can't possibly enter into the relationship of powers between him and the other members, but it is something I want to explore if you're interested. Of course, these are vertical relationship of powers. Of course, he's a patriarchal figure, but this is not a different home from many other homes. It's just weird in its infrastructure, okay? Let's say how Bruce Lee depicts the canal, because we never really hear Bruce Lee's voice. In the documentaries, he's given voice for 3 seconds, and usually they just cut whatever they want to, things that are useful to replicate the stereotypical narrative. Okay? But there is something that Bruce Lee always repeats, and sometimes it is also portrayed in the documentary. It is essentially the fact that himself and the other members of the close circle, managing the canal, wanted to show an alternative. Okay? They wanted to bring to the fore an alternative way of life. Because they had other alternatives, and other alternatives was to go, an alternative was to go to the shelter provided by the municipality. But if you go to the shelter provided by the municipality, first off, You need to wake up at the time they tell you to wake up. You have to queue in the evening in order to access the center. You cannot consume drug anymore because, of course, there is no harm reduction policy. There are no, room in which you can inject yourself if you wish to inject yourself. You have to oblige to certain rules, and they decided not to oblige to certain rules, and I respect their choice. Okay? I'm not judging them for that. I think it's important to value the choice that they made. Okay? Which is an historically informed choice, okay? But then again, we need to problematize what we mean by choice. I've told you we are independent, and this notion of independence was very important. They felt secure in that space, okay? We are independent, we don't need to answer to no one. We have our own house, we have a job, and we are ourselves. I want to, so I'm doing this because I want them to acknowledge that they can earn money through work. People were working, okay? I'll tell you about this in a second. It doesn't matter what. They can clean, wash, they can help me do this. They are paid, okay? Second, and this is another important point for me to understand why this place was home. What he and his people did was neither becoming rich nor about turning into an organized form of crime. Rather, it was above all about making condizione di piazza maggiore, better life conditions. Better life conditions in respect to what? Better life conditions in respect of being homeless on the streets of Bucharest. Okay? It's not only that there it's colder, it's that it is harder to establish a sort of economy of exchange, of trust, of care, in a space that has no roof, has no containment. So there is a physicality that is important here. Okay? I'm trying everything not to break the law, you see, and of course it's a discourse like many others. I admit using drugs because this is our life, our misery. In this hall where we have been rejected, I've tried to improve life conditions, to live like people, because I'm not interested in building a house anymore or to have all the facilities. Everyone simply minds his own business. But I'm interested for everyone, not for me, because God has given me everything to live in. Of course, he is trying to depict himself in a good light. Okay? He is saying that he is the Savior. But for me, this is just fine. I mean, it's just part of the discourse of the kind of knowledge that was produced in the Canal. He was the leader of that case. And as scholars, we can problematize that, but we need to take that into account. People were calling him Tata. He was the father. Okay? There was a relationship there that is important for the construction of the home. Look at the material register here. This is the Canal. 2 pipes, covered, people injecting, you can go into the other room. Life in the Canal exceeds intentionality. It is mediated, infra-made, and again, you see this refers to Maruska's presentation, and also to Gassan's actually. And it produces ways of being together. It is the mediation of things like tracks and pipes that makes life possible. And life in the Canal succeeds intentionality precisely because people do what they do, not just because they want. They do what we do because of the assemblage. I do what I do because I am within a social context and a material context. I give you 3 examples. The first, of course, material thing to look at in the Canal were the pipes themselves. Okay? Drug users have covered the pipes with concrete and carpets to reduce the heat. The pipes aren't only an infrastructure in the technical sense of the term. They are a tangible representation of how the city can be reassembled, of how the city can be reappropriated. I was discussing with somebody the other day that there is a lot of literature around this when it comes to squatting. Okay? So looking at the squat not only as a political act, but looking at the squat as something that is assembled in order to make a differential life possible in the city. This is more than resilience. This is make shift. Make something in order to shift your life condition. It's not just about the status quo. There is nothing about the status quo here. There is something different. And you do that through this material infrastructure, in the case of Bucharest at least. The other material component, of course, were drugs. heroin, Aurolac, legal highs methadone, okay? So why legal? Because they were actually legal. These are the ethnobotanic drugs. They were legal in Romania up to 2010. Shops were open, people started to get into legal highs, get into methadone, because they thought that by doing that, since the substance was legal, that was a safe way for them to get rid of heroin, okay? Actually, that was a terrible idea, because methadone is way worse than heroin. It's way more dangerous and way more addictive. Heroin is not the most addictive drug in the world. Methadone and all the derivatives of it are way more dangerous and way more addictive. Why addictive? Why dangerous? It's because nobody really knows what is in that thing. It's not studied. There is very low purity. It can be done very easily. It's not, you don't need to cultivate opium in order to produce it. It's done in a laboratory in all sorts of conditions. So, and the substance is changing constantly. There are lots of studies about this, especially in the US. And actually, methadone is very popular among UK students. We were discussing this before. Not exactly methadone, but we were discussing the popularity of drugs among students. So there is a very low purity of drugs. Legal highs are not tested. The National Agency for Anti-Drugs in Romania knows almost nothing about what is legalized nowadays in the state of Romania. They don't do studies. There is no treatment, high dependence, the body changes because methadone really destroys the fibers and destroys the veins. And so that's why in the video you can see Orlando with a huge infection. Actually, Orlando died of an infection, not that one, another one. But these infections are generated by the fact that the methadone is filled with, sorry for the term, shit. And the second is that they use very poor syringes to inject. They don't use the right syringes. And actually these syringes are given by the only true harm reduction NGOs in Bucharest. They do an excellent job. They just cannot afford the syringes, the right syringes to inject, because syringes changes, the needle change. And these needles are terrible, vibrate inside the body, so infections and so on and so forth. Why I'm describing all this? Because this makes what is the underground. This makes life in the canal, okay? Which is horrible, but it's what it is. I wanted to read a quote, I'm not going to, but you can find it in the paper, okay? And it's about the way in which people helped each other injecting. I'll show something about it in a minute. The other point about the materiality of the canal is that in order to make life possible, you need to construct the infrastructure, okay? Which is, you need to buy food, you need to have electricity. For the heating, you are covered because you have the pipes. And then you have, you need to care about all other things, So I'm just referring to these electric economies, okay, to electricity. It's just an example. There are many others that include collecting and selling scrap metals, buying and selling drugs and medicines, steel, cooking, sleeping, and so on and so forth. Actually, the major source of income for the community, was not selling drugs, because essentially they were selling my drugs among themselves. It was to collect scrap materials in Bucharest, bringing these materials, these cables, down in the underground, selecting, copper on the one end and iron in another, and then re-emerging from the underground and bringing this material to the people that were buying them, using taxis, relating with people around in the Gara de Nord. So I'm describing the Canal as a community that is self-contained just for the sake of simplicity, because I don't have enough time. I'm actually writing a book about this, so this is the length of this, But it's a community that is open to the outside. It relates to the outside. Anyway, about electricity, which is actually an example of relating to the outside. Somebody disconnected the cable from the public lamp where it was connected. So you have this cable running from the canals outside. Actually, the cable is connected to a switch that is handmade by the people in the canal. So that switch is underground, and from that switch, you have all sorts of plugs and connections in the underground, and then you have this cable coming up. The cable, here you see Bruce Lee dealing with the cable in order to reopen the wires and connect those wires to the public lamp. Okay, so here it is. They are here, you know, burning the cable coming out of the public lamp and connecting it with the lighter, okay, in order to recreate the connection. And it's very, you know, artisanal and it's very provisional, but that is it. Everything is provisional if you want to sustain life there. When electricity is disconnected from the main source, that is that cable, it is generated through this petrol generator. Okay? Of course, can you imagine to have a generator in the underground in those chambers? I mean, the smell is audible, and the noise of this. I can't give you a sense of the soundscape of the canal. The soundscape of the canal is so rich and is part of the constitution of that subjectivity. So it is made of this generator, you know, and then the television with the loud Michele music. Michele music is the music of Roma people and you are injecting heroin. You know? And we are laughing, and I'm glad we are because we need to access. But this is the weirdness of that home, which is important. Why is it important? Because now, if I bring you into the canal, if I describe this weirdness throughout ethnography, when you see this picture, what do you see? You can't possibly see only a man injecting drug. Okay? You see more than that, because this person is more of that act. Cannot be reduced. His life cannot be reduced to that act. His life cannot be self-contained in the definition of being homeless, big drug users. That person is more, and is more because he is showing us that he is more by listening to that music, creating this infrastructure. And last point, and here I close, by having all sorts of affective care for the other. Okay? So this home is a home also because there is an affective politics going on. People were cutting each other's hair. Okay? They were going to parties, they were having a life outside. So, you know, young men wanted to be dressed in a cool way, and they were doing that in the town. And I'm not romanticizing life. Huh? I'm just depicting the complexity of that life, and this is part of that complexity. So for me, investigating the complex affective register of the canals show the normality of a life under abnormal conditions, but that life in that condition is normal. Okay? This is not resilience once again, it's about the surplus of that life that was created underground, that points to a specific way of being in the world. So there are many affective registers. The quote I was going to read, which I am not, is this very long quote, which is just about 10 minutes of ethnographic observation of myself sitting on a pipe, Angela, where you are now, and another guy very close to her, and it's this 10 minutes description of how that guy is trying to help Andrea to inject. Okay? Injecting is very difficult. It's not easy. Especially when your veins are completely destroyed. So you can't see your veins anymore. You need to look all over the body, in order to find a point where you can inject. And this man was injecting this woman in the space of the canal. I told you that you saw it already. It's super tiny, you know, with people passing by. And you have this needle, sorry if I use it this way, you have this needle pointed into the skin of this woman with everybody, you know, pushing. And this man is doing everything he can in order to, you know, to make sure that the needle doesn't break in the body of Andrea. So there is a politics of care there, okay, of attention, that although it is weird, I mean, they are injecting heroin and they are killing themselves, there is something powerful to be highlighted. There is an harm reduction there that is from the underground. It comes from below. It doesn't need policymakers to arise. And then, you know, cooking, cleaning dishes. This is at home, as I was saying. So they were eating food that they bought or that some people brought to them. You know, all sorts of acts of care. This is a woman, Helena, telling us it's a very good life here. We have food and warmth, and we have everything we need. And in another quote, she also says again, we are independent. This is our home. Now, what happens to this home, and here I really finish, is that after the exposition, brought to the fore by Channel Force and many other, this home is, these people are addicted, you know, and they end up in the street and they essentially die. There is this notion of the uninhabitable, so those places that are considered to be uninhabitable, places that are considered to be impossible for life, the shanty town, the slum, the occupied building, the occupied factory, the underground canal. These are the uninhabitable. But in order to understand what makes life possible in the uninhabitable, we need to get close. We need to use ethnography. The infra-making of the canal is one that allowed people to be together, to survive, to go along, and have a better life. They define that as a better life, and I respect that definition. And normative politics has wiped out this togetherness, replacing it with nothing. Because it's not an alternative to tell people to go to a homeless shelter, because that is not what they want. Okay? If they go to the homeless shelter, they will stay 2 days maximum in the homeless shelter, because no harm reduction is provided, no drugs, they cannot consume drugs, they cannot be together. This is another important point, because in the homeless shelter you are divided. Women in one part, men in another, children in another part. Okay? You are destroying the family. And of course, you are doing that because you need to control individuals. Weird politics. For me, the only meaningful civic politics, when it comes to the canals, when it comes to homeless people, is weird. It needs to be weird. It needs to be different from the canonical conception of home, of housing. It needs to be different because they are different. They are embedding a different form of life. Only starting from that exoskeleton, from this relationship I showed to you, one can think of liberating policies of poverty management and homelessness, not normative ones, but policies, and I can give you an example later on in the discussion, that take into consideration the subjects that you have in front of you. Learning from the implicit and explicit labor that the canals people put into building their uninhabitable home is about suspending judgment, acknowledging different and fighting for a different understanding of life at the urban margins. This is, I think, what I did in my ethnography. I suspended judgment. And I learned how to suspend judgment with working for many years with homeless people in Turin, now with drug users in Bucharest, and then with addicted people. You suspend judgment because at the moment in which you do that, you are able to see the urban political that these communities enact. Now, you can see that and then say, it's rubbish, but at least you need to see that, to embrace a differential understanding of the fact that life is not the same for everyone. Okay, sorry if it was too long.